Hi and welcome to the Active Code podcast, brought to you by Aspire Active Partnerships. I'm Paul Griffiths, and joining me each week on the pod is Luke Johnson.
Aspire Active Partnerships is a community of like-minded business leaders who all believe that collaboration in the sports coaching and children's activity sector is essential for success. We've proven that working in collaboration does benefit business growth and essentially helps more children be more active more often.
To combat physical inactivity, we need organisations that are performing at their very best. Organisations will only operate to high standards if they are led well. So, if we can focus on developing high quality leaders throughout an organisation, not just at the top, customers will experience higher quality services, which means heightened enjoyment levels and increased levels of physical activity. And if we do this at an early age, we know that we can build the foundations for a more active, happier and healthier life. The Active Code investigates what it really takes to be a successful leader and how organisations can combat physical inactivity.
We won't be alone through this journey. We are joined by business owners and experts from our sector, as well as inspirational people from outside our industry. We'll understand the importance of physical activity to our guests, reflect on leadership experiences, and gain thought-provoking insights on how we can crack the Active Code and get more children more active more often. If you like what you hear, please leave us a rating and subscribe. Matt and Nowell, welcome to the Active Code podcast. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you very much for inviting me on. Looking forward to the conversation.
And it's going to be a good one. The podcast delves into the link between physical activity, sport, and leadership. You've got interest in all three. Could you share your journey so far and how those three kind of intertwine?
Yeah, very much so. God, I've always, when everyone asks me about my career, I always sort of say it's never had a plan. And there are, and I think when you think about sport, sometimes there's always a very clear structure and a plan and a goal of where you're getting to. And I've never really had that. So it is kind of a juxtaposition in terms of the link. But I've always been historically very interested in sport and been a lover of all sports really. And my mum was fantastic as a young kid. She would always invest almost in every little glimpse of interest that I showed, like full on investment. I'd get fully kitted out and everything, and probably within months of maybe getting reasonably competent at something, I'd get bored and then go on to the next thing. And my mum would always look at me and say, pick something and stick with it, please. I think that stuck with me for the rest of my life, really, bless her. So I've done every sport under the sun, but I think the thing I've loved about that and how it's transitioned into my work life and even into my latter stages, I'm nearly 50 now. I've had the pleasure of also coaching grassroots football for 3 or 4 years, which was a huge experience for me in many ways in terms of working with kids and the challenges that raises dealing with all of those different individuals, and you sort of learn so much about yourself. And I think there's so many parallels between sport and the attitudes that you need to bring, the discipline you need to bring, and the link to managing a business, managing a team, in a professional work environment. And so, where that led me, I think ironically, even though I had a love of sport and I've worked in people, management for 25 years, I never woke up going, that's what I'm going to do. Again, that whole thing of the plan, I'm going to be a lawyer or a vet, sort of like that. I just fell into it. I fell into the people side of things, but recognized that I had a real interest in science, the behavioural science of how people think and act and work. And again, you see it now, it's everywhere in sport, the role of data, the understanding of the science behind sport, the links between the two. There's so much that each are learning from one another, and that's why I think some of the best leaders in the world have historically had that background as well. Interesting.
Matt, I'm really interested in knowing from your experience of working in the corporate world, managing people, which is the biggest challenge? Is it managing people in the corporate world or managing a kids' football team? Or the parents
They're
of
very,
a kids'
very
football
different,
team?
aren't they? They're very, very different. But I think, like I said a moment ago, they require very similar uh, communication levels, really. I think the success of working with kids or the success of working and managing people is foundationally rooted in good communication. And I think that's where we as a society, even now, in whether it's work or private lives, we're having to learn and adapt to very new ways of communicating. All you have to do is just think about the advent of social media and digital and where people are spending their time and how these young kids communicate, let alone how the different generations in a work environment communicate and expect, their sense of, I don't want to use entitlement, but there is this view of, well, the younger generation have a very different view on work to what maybe you and I have, and where we were brought up. So I think, the older kids playing football, give them a sense of purpose, give them clear direction, a little bit of discipline goes some way, but it's not command and control by any stretch. And that fundamentally, if you're going to be successful with kids, which I think is the same with the team, the skill is, and I'm not saying I've nailed this, by the way, far from it. A lot of people that know me would say no, is listening. Again, I did one of your events, which last year, at Aston Villa, and we talked about resilience and the importance of the network, the people around you, but also that space for listening to what's happening and taking step backs and making sure you're moving in the right direction,
Yeah, yeah. And I guess as well from a grassroots perspective, it's the basics of communication and keeping the message simple. So actually, I've got a friend who manages an under sevens football team, and he was telling me a few weeks ago that he realised that his communication wasn't as good as it should have been, because during a game he told one of the kids to keep his head up, intentionally looking for the pass to make, but this kid actually just stopped and started looking up at the sky. So yeah, the importance of getting that communication right and listening is absolutely essential. Matt, what are the links that you've seen there between physical activity and leadership, and have you continued that activity journey yourself through your career?
Well, I think from a leadership standpoint, the only thing I can talk about really in the corporate world has been the explosion around well-being, right? And well-being means many different things. I think since COVID, since the whole world turned upside down in terms of how we operated, how we thought about each other, how we supported one another, how we worked, well-being was sort of trickling along. And that wasn't just about physical activity, that was mental, strength, and wellness and health. And I think, from an activity standpoint, physical activity, sport, I've said it earlier, I think, the sport element teaches us the discipline. It teaches us about self-leadership, but also I think there's that element of accountability, whether you're the sports person or the sports leader, there is an accountability behind what you do, and I think when you think about a leader, and again, that link to physical activity in sport, it gives the importance of, you said it a moment ago, and I'd put it as focus, simplicity between what is it that we're focusing on, having a clear message around that, build that resilience, teach teamwork. I think you can't underestimate in the corporate world. We all do this. We forget there is such a reliance on the team, and making sure you're bringing everybody in and all their strengths to bear. And that is true in sport, right? But I think the other thing, especially around physical activity linked to well-being, I think it's more about managing energy, and especially as a leader, in a business, you are under constant pressure, and especially as a man or as a people manager, you finding the time to do that is really, really tough. And when you work in the environment you guys do, where a lot of your workforce is remote, how do you build that connection? How do you build purpose? how do you leverage their knowledge and their experience, and how do you make yourself available? And those are really big challenges today, but it is that flexibility, in my view, is the new loyalty, right, for business. You've got employees, they're out on the road who maybe don't, what is flexibility to them? Whereas guys that sit in an office like you guys, me, our flexibility is I'm doing this at home. I have this luxury, but they can't do what you guys do at home. So, what does that look like? So I think, physicality or physical activity, if there is a link there, I think there's a huge amount around that leadership side. But I think I'm starting to understand the ways in which you work, and how you bring people from all different spaces and environments together is really quite a critical one.
Matt, you mentioned COVID before, and a bit of change around that regards, where you work, probably more remote work went on then, and you mentioned in our sector specifically, there's a lot of remote workers out in schools or out in holiday camps or colleges. Have any organisations you've worked with or come across done anything kind of quite innovative in terms of engaging those employees that are remote and you might only see them once a month or so, and they don't often see each other as colleagues as well, other than every 4-6 months when you do like a staff training day kind of thing? Have you seen any organisations that have done something quite innovative, or any tips for any organisations that struggle with that?
Well, I think businesses are still sort of struggling to really answer that. But I think, is it a weak answer? I think the role of technology and bringing remote, non-visible people into a space where they can interact, they can have a voice, they can speak to colleagues, they can do a raft of different things in real time is really, really key. And it's not at the end of an email, and it's not at the end of a Teams chat. It's an environment that you're creating where they want to go to it. And I think that's the really interesting thing around remote work or workforces is there's a job to do, there's a process to follow, and we will give you those tools. But actually, as an engaging environment, and a place that I want to go into, and a place that I know I'm going to get responses and reactions to. If you haven't nailed that, that is your key one from foundation. Unless Paul and others get on their bike and car and go out and see them and do roadshows constantly and make sure that they are visible, which again is the other thing I have seen. People have made sure that with such a remote workforce that they are out and about, they're being seen by their people. You are turning up and giving them time. It's not just a gathering in, we'll bring the team together, in a special venue somewhere, and we'll give them some recognition. I'm just going to rock up and I'm going to come and show my face and, see how you're doing. I'll catch up and take you out thereafter. So I think there's this authenticity from a leadership standpoint. Lots of businesses starting to see that if we can remove the mundane day-to-day drudgery, dare I say it, of managing a business and automate as much as we can and be, a lot of this AI talk, right? We go back to that. This is all changing the speed in which we can do things. The time it takes me to write something where I'll never forget, I saw Paul one time, you were in a coffee shop writing up I think you were responding to a request from a client. And it was, historically, I remember what it was like, and there would be days of lots of people's time and effort. Right? Whereas now there are lots of things that we have tools available to reduce a lot of that time down, right? And I don't need to really go into what those are, but they are now making it available. So then that means that leaders have more time, I would say. And if you haven't time, you're not using the technologies available to you well enough, and you haven't automated, or you haven't really thought through your work environment and the plate and the things that matter to give you the space. Because that's what people worry about, right? They worry about, businesses are talking about middle management, the role of management. Is it dead because people can just be self-reliant. They can find information where they need it. What was a manager to what it is today. And that then means if there's a gap and that shrinks, the leaders at the top are now even more exposed in terms of what role do you play. So I think there is this dynamic at the moment where people don't really know. They're struggling between the historical traditional ways of work and a work environment to what the new world actually really is. And are you using it? And whether you're a 5-man business, a 2-man business, a 10,000 strong business, you know, you can use technology, for instance, in ways to engage your workforce, help them do their work, find out things they need, you know, and I think the businesses that adapt to that quicker, I think, are the ones that are going to be more successful with, especially with their remote workforces. But again, it's this sort of thing, right? Of if you've got a remote workforce, how do you leverage their experiences day to day? Because what you should not be doing is spending 3 months, 6 months, 12 months doing a check-in and polling something to see how things are going, because businesses don't operate like that. And especially if and I know you guys are like this, you're very agile, lots of new innovation, products, services, a whole range of things that you've got to move really quickly. So how do you engage the workforce in environments of constant change? You've got to engage them, and you've got to give them a sense that they're part of the change, they're co-creating. And again, how do you do that? I'll never forget, it obviously hit me because I heard this story 10 years ago, and it is still relevant today, that when I worked at IBM, we had there was a policy announced by our a global HR director, that we couldn't expense Uber as part of our policy. And it's like, hey, what do you mean we can't expense Uber? You know, and they put this whole reasoning behind it. But foundationally, the business and the employees in IBM, who were going through a huge transformation, who were repositioning themselves as innovation in technology, and Uber being a massive disruptor in the space of technology, you know, deploying it. How can you? This is what's the word? So it was almost counterintuitive that you're doing this, because we know that Uber are this sort of business. We want to be that sort of business. You're telling us that we can't expense it. So what happened was a kid, and I say a kid, he was 25, in Sydney, IBM, in Sydney's office, he started to moan about it on our internal social media platform with his other mates and say, what a joke this is, blah, 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 and we're supposed to do this, that. It, within hours, went global, to petition level. We're talking 250. IBM, I don't know if they are now, but there were 440,000 people. 250,000 people were commenting, liking, agreeing with this sentiment. Within 24 hours, the policy was revoked, right? From a little kid in Sydney, other side of the world, having a moan about something, but it escalated so quickly. And I think that's the world, right? That's how quickly people can be disengaged, and how quickly people can be disrespectful of your brand and impact your brand. And you as a leader, how the hell do I manage that when I could have kids or young people going off and moaning and going on Glassdoor or whatever it might be, or on social networks, affects our brand. So it is fascinating, that is the power and the speed of giving people platforms for change, and not being, that young lad wasn't penalized, but the CHRO knew about it, who's based out in New York, because she had she had a massive red screen outside her office that was tracking all sentiment. It wasn't tracking all the words, not, and the conversation. It was just spikes of, there's a lot of chat going on. And she was like, what is that? And it was like, well, it's this. And she was like, oh, okay. That's quite important. That is, that was 10 years ago, right? And that still rings true today. So that shows you, I think, we're still juggling with this,
Yeah. It'd be a bot doing it now, Matt. That's the only difference. It'd be an AI bot that the young person in Sydney is trained to do it for them.
Yeah. Well, again, I think that sadly, yes. You know, and yet again, that's the other thing. You know, how do you as a leader then recognize that and educate people on, you know, the fear of AI and digital technology and work, and it's replacing jobs. And you know, think about your guys. Will AI replace jobs in the physical space? No. You know, but we can use it. You know, we can use it a lot in terms of making ourselves really efficient, or making ourselves more innovative with experience and learning. You know.
Yeah. I was actually I went on a workshop last month now. It's really interesting because they actually said they looked at some sectors and said that actually AI won't wipe jobs out. It will actually create more jobs because the physical space, if you like, we're talking, you know, what we do and the organisations in our sector, all the way through to gyms, etc. Because they believe that AI will force human interaction more, because people are probably thinking they get driven to virtual worlds, and there will be elements of that, but they think they actually will have the reverse effect, that people actually want human connection. So that means like more communities for businesses, more communities for children, young people, more communities on the sporting front, more communities from a fitness perspective. And I think you're almost starting to see elements of that anyway, especially when it comes to fitness. And a lot of the competitions are out there now that have popped up in recent years of that kind of, yes, it's a slightly competitive element, but there is definitely a community feel to it and the approach and how people are going. So, yeah, really interesting. The next couple of years could actually be a boom, I think, in that side of things when it comes to the human interaction and the importance of activity and AI. So, be interesting to see how that goes.
Mm.
But will robots replace coaches? Maybe at some point, but not for another decade, I reckon. So, but
But you're right. That human, the being human thing is the uncertainty, right, of how we're going to react. I'm like you, and again, I do wonder though, when you think about as a leader, you all know how we think. I don't know. I can't speak for you, Paul, but I've had that same thought. This belief that there might be some sort of mini revolution against it. That we are human beings and we crave interaction and physicality. We do. But you also have this younger generation who don't have access to sport like they should. And we were maybe brought up in a time when there was a lot of it available to us, right? And we didn't have the digital technology that we now have. So we know what the world used to be like. And we maybe crave a bit of that because it's our human instinct. But actually, these younger kids, and I see it even in my own son, I can't talk to your own children, but my kids, you know, they play virtually. You know, they aren't, you know, I remember listening to my young girls and they were on Roblox and they were playing they were playing games in Roblox as if they had mates over, right? So they were dressing up and they were doing stuff with dogs and they were role playing families, but they're doing it in a digital space. And it's not kind of like my mate over for an hour and that's once a week. I can do it every day if I really want to. Don't let that.
yeah.
Because what the others are. But again, it's, you know, you talk about, well, what is the future of physical interaction and space and how the younger generation, how do you keep them interested in a physical environment when they do innately enjoy it? Maybe they're just, their world is not set up that way. Schools are maybe can't invest in the way that they do. You know, I've seen it with my son's football team in his school. You know, they've played teams that have played maybe, you know, my son seems to have played 8-9 games this season.
The phrase, what gets measured gets managed, was coined by the American management consultant Pete Drucker over 40 years ago. Although there have been some alternatives to this phrase, one that resonates with me is what gets measured gets improved.
In recent years, this alternative phrase has gained popularity, emphasising the idea that measuring progress is crucial to achieving improvement.
Scorecards are a great way to highlight your strengths and identify blind spots in your organisation while providing instant, actionable steps on how you can improve that needs improving.
So, how does your organisation measure up?
Head to capscorecard.scoreup.com and take approximately 5 minutes to answer some yes/no questions. Once you've done that, you will get an instant personalised report tailored to your organisation with clear, actionable steps. And it's totally free.
That's capscorecard.scoreup.com, and the link will be in the show notes too.
Right? But we play teams who've had one game. And you go, impossible. When I was a kid, we were playing loads of teams. We always seem to be playing teams. And all you hear now, the reasoning is, well, teachers maybe don't have the time. And someone's got to take the time out to do it. You go, Christ, this is such an important part of life. You're teaching our kids team at their sports, but it's all gone outside now, right? It's all extracurricular activities, not school responsibility. I find it fascinating. I think it is an interesting point for where we're going to go. But are we really thinking about that younger generation? What do they crave? Do you have anything on that? Do you see anything on that, or in terms of studies or research into the reactions of kids at the younger age? Or they just innately want to be physical?
No, well, I've not researched anything. I've not looked at it. I'm sure there's stuff out there. It might be something that jump on Perplexity, another AI tool that will give us some of that research pretty quickly. But no, I'm sure there is. There's bound to be. I think a lot of the stuff that I have seen, heard, read is kind of finding that happy medium, I think, and I get that. Yeah, we're obviously all for making sure that we give kids positive activity experiences, but if they thrive to live in a more digital world, I think we've got to certainly be open to that. And you look at the generational gap in the workplace. If we've got a new generation about to enter the workplace, and we've still got baby boomers in the workplace, all of a sudden you've got probably the first time where there's 4, potentially 5 generations within a workplace, which, the people are working for longer. So we're still going to have baby boomers in that workplace environment with people at the other end of the spectrum who are in this new digital world. It's going to be interesting from a people perspective. It makes it so much more complex.
Yeah, well, think about it from a leadership standpoint. You think about historical leadership development programs. They've really had to evolve. I did some research and developed a framework around just the experience-led leader. And it sounds really, really wishy-washy, but to understand the world of work and how the world has changed, are leaders set up to cope with it? In a world where the youngsters maybe don't want it. Interesting. They don't necessarily even need it sometimes. And that's what infuriates on leadership. So they're trying to redesign and rethink what that future leadership experience training purposes is fascinating, because, I think we're playing in these spaces now and we're adapting to it because we're sort of maybe of that age where we had a bit of a taste of digital when we were younger, so we can transition. But even still, it's a world apart.
Yeah. I guess that comes onto that kind of employee experience, because it's obviously very important, even more so given what we've just been talking about. So I guess my question would be on that one with regards to employee experience in this day and age. Why is it so important?
God, it's, employee experience has been around for a while as a term, but I think organizations have interpreted it in very different ways. Some have, and we do this a lot in my space, we like magpies, we see something new, it's shiny, and we jump on it and go, oh, that's going to change the way people see us. We're all about employee experience. So HR, as an example, we're employee experience people now, and you go, well, what does that mean? Well, I'm just an HR business partner still, but I've got this title, and it means, that I I think differently about the experiences of work when in fact they don't. And I think what employee experience is really about is not just behavior. It's not just about culture, not just about the work environment. It is about the technology. It's also about the processes. It's everything that influences your work day, right? And that's where businesses that are effective and effectively deploying the concept of employee experiences, they're looking at everything, right? And they're thinking it's not just about perks, it's not about benefits, it's not about salary. It is about your leader, it is about the manager, the person you work with, it is about the team, it is about the tools. But it's kind of interesting because I think when we think about experience is the outcome, I think, that drives things like engagement and productivity and performance, right? So is your experience at a point where you are driving the right outcomes? Do you know what the outcomes are that you're looking for, right? And historically in HR terms, we look back rather than forwards, right? But I think, again, back to COVID, we talked about the transition. That's where everything turned on its head. Because everything traditionally we knew needed to be an office, and you needed to sit at a desk, and you needed a team, and you couldn't be this and you couldn't do that, and we couldn't be effective and make money. But we proved all of that wrong. So now it's a reshape. So it is about the experience. And sorry,
Go on, man.
no, go on.
I was going to say, if leaders or organizations are struggling to, you mentioned the outcomes, because you need to know what the outcome should be before you can really address it. What type of examples can you give of what those outcomes could be?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I think historically, we will look at things like measurement around retention, attrition as being key indicators, right, of the success of our culture. If we're not losing people, then that's a good thing. We must be doing something right. Or ironically, we actually say that sometimes you're being overly complacent, and change is sometimes a good thing. You need fresh blood to come into the business and change things. But I think, that suddenly starting to think about the role of how we collaborate, right? So how do we use things like I started to play around the COVID time with a fascinating topic around organizational network analysis. And it basically looked at the digital landscape that we create as an organization. So all of the different connections, all of the out messages, the meetings, the chat, all of the things that create the space of, and starting to look for patterns in well-being, right? So starting to look at overload of work, hours worked, time spent in meetings, all of that stuff. And if you can start to see the influence of your culture, so we have a culture, you speak to lots of business, we're just in meetings all the time, and we're not able to do anything because we just sit in meetings. Well, that's a cultural issue. It's not just about meetings, it's about hierarchy, it's about delegation, it's about command and control. It's a whole range of things, right, that change the way that we operate. So how do we start to look at time spent in meetings versus looking at somebody's time? Are they sitting in an office 9 to 5, where we would clock someone as being, well, they've sat at their desk from 9 o'clock and they left at 5:30. Now we're looking at a remote workforce of where are they spending their time? And actually, what does performance really look like? If you can achieve what you can achieve, if you can achieve what's required of you in 4 hours, but we expect you to be able to do it over a week, well, what does that say? Right. So again, understanding those levels of efficiency. But I think, that world of trying to measure, I think it's more about linking people to your business metrics. So it is about profit. It is about, there was a really good example of working with a client who were an engineering firm. So very, very different. I get that. But they were looking at measuring engagement and the influence on something they call rework, right? And what that means is they would make big vehicles, right, for construction. And they'd come up the line, right, and they would go out, and then they would be sent back if there were faults. And so they would have a team that would have to then deal with those faults. And they were able to make those links that said, this is costing us quite a lot of money when we do this. And it's showing that if we have it's the disengaged teams that are driving the callback scenario, right? Because they're disengaged, they're not performing, the product's not great, it's gone out, and now they've got it back. So the teams that have high levels of engagement are actually performing well, and they have less recall, right? So we can now start to see the direct link to a business outcome from a people-generated experience, if you like. Yeah. But what they dug into, it was really interesting. It wasn't just about engagement and the manager. It was about learning. It was about communication. It was a whole range of things that were underpinning the impact of that. But again, I think it's just thinking about your key business metric and can you trace it back to people, right? And if you can't, and you're a people business, then there's something wrong there. You got to find those,
I think it's definitely linked to, because NPS, customer satisfaction, that's a key metric for us, and that can definitely be linked back to potentially
it's a historical one, right?
Yeah,
It's a historical
definitely.
one.
There's knock-on effects. You mentioned disengaged employees, and I think in our sector, because it's a service-based industry, you've got problems with, if someone's disengaged, they're off more, they're absent more, which has a knock-on effect to people then covering people being dragged out of their roles doing their high payoff activities to go in and cover so-and-so who's off again, but probably because they're disengaged. So there are a lot of links back to, like you said, linking it back to the overall KPIs of things. Absolutely. How important is storytelling within organizations for leaders to drive that positive culture?
Well, storytelling's been around a very long time, hasn't it? Right. We know how powerful storytelling is. And I think there's something around it. It sounds counterintuitive when I say this, because it's more impactful, I think, what you do than what you say. Right. So, you can be the best orator in the world, right? But if there's no follow-up and no action, it's pointless. But the power of telling a story that resonates with some is one of the arts that businesses have not nailed. Leaders aren't able to encapsulate an energy, right? And articulate an experience, articulate a story. It's interesting though, when I hear businesses like yourselves, where there's a chap, I can't remember his name. He's not in your business, but he's in your network. And he's very active on social media. Can't remember the guy's name. Young guy.
Is it Carl?
Yeah, it might be Carl. Yeah. And he is it seems to be intentionally creating a narrative around his experience, right? And he's doing it through social media, right? And it seems very authentic, really genuine, but underneath there are going to be reasons why he feels that he's doing that. But he is encapsulating his experiences and presenting them back in a way that people will they'll connect with, because it's an authentic story, right? Because it's something that he believes in. And I think leaders need to remember these stories. They need to be able to share those stories, but they also need to recognize that they've got loads of their guys out on the ground, on the shop floor, and they have stories. And it's getting under the skin of those stories, because your story is your brand, foundationally, right? And if your story is not clear for people to follow, then what does that say about your brand? And I think, especially with, or I can only talk for you guys as far as what you do, there's a very clear story. The question you ask yourself is, how much do you use your story? to communicate, to attract, clients, people, employees? How effective are you at holding on to your story or enhancing your story? Because that's the other thing with stories, right? They'll change. A new chapter's written, and then we need to keep on top of those stories. It's not we set up and this is the story of where we set up. It's now where we've come to. And I think it's a real art, and it's even an art now in terms of things like data. We're a businesses now that thrive on lots and lots of data, but most data gets lost and not used because there's no story. It's factually evident and useful, but we haven't connected it to something meaningful. So I think it's the essence of a culture of a business. And if you're not capturing those stories regularly and using them, I think that's where the innovation comes from for most businesses.
Matt, earlier on in the podcast, you mentioned kind of employee satisfaction, maybe pulse checks or 6 monthly surveys you send out to employees to check how well things are going, and kind of hints that that's probably not enough, and that's not going to affect really your employee experience. What advice would you give to organisations that want to move kind of beyond those surveys to make some real positive change for their employees and their experience?
It's a really difficult question, because if you're a company of 20 people, you don't really need to do a survey, right? You should be, if you're not, you should be on the ground and you should know what's going on. But your listening is real time, right? You are sitting down and talking to people. So it's not that surveys are dead. You need to listen, and you should be capturing information. I think the question is about how regularly more importantly, it's the action you take. And I think what lots of businesses are doing with listening now is they're moving into a collective view of listening across the employee life cycle. So they're getting feedback on the recruitment experience. They're getting feedback on the performance experience. They're getting feedback on the work experience. They're getting feedback on onboarding. They're getting feedback on exit. They're getting feedback on change initiatives. They're getting feedback, and there can be lots and lots of it, but there's no time to do anything. And by the time the feedbacks come in, there's no time for the action because something else has happened. So I think people are moving more to polling quickly. I think they are moving to, there's a need for an annual poll. I get that. You need to poll. If you've got, they say you've got over 35, 50 people, you should be surveying your people every year. Once a year, just get a sense check. But actually where your activity comes in is, what are the areas of the business that we're going through challenges? How do we start polling regularly? But then the skill, I think, of what we're seeing for people in terms of how they're changing is the speed at which they create the change, right? So we're going to create agile, squads that are going to focus in on addressing this challenge. It's not going to be reliant on, let's say, Paul and James we've had our organizational feedback, and now we've got to sit down and try and figure it out. We've now got really good people in lots of different parts of the business. We're going to assign a team, and they're going to go off and they're going to come up with some new ideas, co-create, which means they're going to be getting employees involved in the idea generation, but they're going to then test. They're just going to test stuff, right? We're going to move quickly. And if that doesn't work, we go, well, at least we tried it, and we'll move on and we'll try something else. Whereas I think a lot of the time, employee engagement surveys, they keep us at a point on a topic that people do nothing with, really, because the speed in which we work has changed. So I think it's back to what I was saying earlier about metrics and understanding what it is. I think what we historically measure in engagement, I think maybe needs to change. And the only way you can maybe do that is by looking at what makes your business tick. Do you know that? Do you know, what are the things that foundationally matter to this business? Is it teamwork? Because if it's teamwork and it's vital to what we do, how can we monitor that? What does that mean? because you don't capture that always in a survey. That makes sense. And it's momentary. So, yeah. But I think it's collect data, but only if you do something with it.
Most pointless.
Yeah. But sadly, a lot of the time it is.
Yeah.
And it just becomes a tick box process. But I think if you can engage your teams, think back to the COVID thing again, the speed in which things changed and the activities, the things that you were able to do that changed the way you operated really quickly. You're like, Jesus Christ, where did that come from? I think that's the space of the environment you're working in now.
Matt, I think we're close to 50 minutes, which is, it's been brilliant. It's been really good. We're going to have to cut the conversation short. We really could have carried on for a good 2 hours. Maybe get into long form content region, Luke, going forwards. But it's been brilliant. It's been really useful. Lots of great tips, lots of insights. We went off on a tangent a few times, which I thought was really useful. Actually, I thought there's some really good conversations going there. It'll be really helpful for our listeners. It certainly helped me. I've been scribbling a few notes down here as well.
Yeah. It's a complicated beast.
It certainly is.
There's no single answer, but I think there are foundationally things that you can just put in place. Good listening, use of data where you need, or technology to be really effective at what you do. But yeah, I think those three things: technology, rethink how you work, and listen. But listen intently with action, I think is critical.
Yeah, and you've kind of stole the ending, because I was going to say,
Sorry.
what are your final top tip? But there we go. Absolutely brilliant. Beat me to it. Save me doing even more talking, Matt. But thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. Some great insights, like I say, and some good tips to follow there. There's plenty of actions, I think, off the back of this for any of our listeners. So thank you so much. If people
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no worries. If people want to connect with you, where is the best place to find you, Matt?
You can email me at matt@storylabscreative.com. Or you can give me a call if you want. How novel is that? Actually speak to somebody directly. And my mobile number as well is 07876 574 140. So reach out either way.
Brilliant. Great stuff. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
Search for the Active Code on your podcast app. Let's work together to get more people more active more often.